Hi everyone, it's Cam. Today is August 6th, and I wanted to talk about role models today. This is a topic that I kind of talked about here and there, but I want to talk about it specifically in its own little video. Because when I'm thinking about, who I identify with, who's relevant to me, um, and I feel really weird about that because I feel like there's a lot of characters that I don't necessarily identify with, but were like part of like formative fiction for me. And it's hard, it's really, really weird. I'm going through who I identify with as characters and, you know, just also figures, historical figures, people in general, and I'm finding that there's not a lot of women. Um, and I don't mean that in the sense that like I don't identify with women or I don't theoretically identify with women. It's more like they just aren't present as much in media, in what I was taught in history courses, in what was prevalent in pop culture. You know, I grew up like in the 90s. So like that's somewhat relevant to this because like now, I think post 2010, there's a lot more, and also especially like more recently, there's a lot more emphasis on the creation of positive feminine role models, positive figures, characters, more emphasis on historical investment in feminine figures. But yeah, for me, especially growing up, there really wasn't. Um, and one of the um, something that I always thought about a lot in the past couple years because I started getting into like drag queens. I really liked following that. I watched RuPaul's Drag Race a little bit. Not recently. I haven't. I paid well, now. I actually just pay attention to like Trixie Mattel and Katya and a whole bunch of other people kind of outside of Drag Race. But um, and it always struck me as interesting as like, well, why are there are a lot of drag race, drag queens, but also gay men in general that their cultural touchstones for women are entertainers, like singers or actresses, or like why is Cher a thing? Why was Judy Garland a thing? And it should have been obvious. It's like historically that was where women were allowed to be significant. It's where women were allowed to be, any kind of anything, and even then it was within very specific boundaries. Hence why, you know, Cher and before her, I guess Judy Garland. That is a thing. If nobody's heard about that, Google friend of Judy's is an interesting phrase. Gay history. Um, but sorry, not friend of Judy's, friend of Dorothy. It was Judy Garland's character, Dorothy Gale. But yeah, Google friend of Dorothy's. That's actually there's a lot of interesting history there. Um, but yeah, my thoughts are like, I don't have a lot of women I identify with or who are cultural touchdowns for me, but I feel a lot of that though is because there weren't a lot of women. Sorry if I say female at any point, I apologize. I mean to say feminine. Feminine characters that, or people that I really identify with, because there weren't a lot of them. Um, the nearest I think of is like, well, who would I identify as like a strong feminine character that I want to be identified with? And my mind went to like Red Sonja, like somebody who didn't really exist as a pop culture icon. I know who Red Sonja is, but like nobody does. For those of you who don't know, she's kind of the counterpart to Conan the Barbarian, kind of. Similar kind of character, but a woman. Um, And that's the kind of like representation that I think would have given me a much stronger handle on an even balance of representation is like, um, characters that represented, things that appealed to me, but were also allowed to be women, and the reason that's important is that there's really not it's really a problem for like people specifically in my situation, but also because bridging the gap and allowing an even flow of respect from men towards women, I think is hampered by a lack of, even distribution of representation and skill sets across fictional characters, but also who real people we let be significant. Um, and I talked to some people, and I know that this isn't a thing for women. This isn't a phenomenon that occurs for women because women identify with masculine characters all the time, to my knowledge. I have a friend who's I know Indiana Jones is a thing for them, and it's like, they're not a man, but they identify with Indiana Jones, and it's because Indiana Jones is a cool character and his field of work and his life is relevant to their interests, and it's like that. From my understanding, that happens a lot, because men and masculine characters are allowed so much more breadth and so much more exposure that you can get that where somebody is a well-developed, fleshed-out character whose interests in life are relevant to yours, and their gender is kind of irrelevant, but I feel like that doesn't go the other way because there's such a, stranglehold on what feminine characters are allowed to do, what feminine characters are considered bankable, things like that. Um, and I think I do want to say, I think recently it's getting a lot better. I think we're letting, women be more successful. We're letting, women be expressed as, different than they used to be before, where I think that part of an implicit part of Hollywood regulations, part of the I think it's called the Hays Code. I think an implicit part of that Hays Code was a depiction of women being demure. I think was kind of built into that as an unstated rule, but kind of there, Um, because I really struggle to think of women, you know, women are so underrepresented in terms of what kind of characters they're allowed to be, what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to say. And it's such a huge problem, because for me right now especially because I feel like I have so little hopes that I can pin to feminine people, to women, you know? Like I'm realizing that like when I think about being masculine, I have all of these characters and role models and like concepts that I can attach to masculinity that make me reticent to leave it. And when I look across to femininity, it's like, what, you got your imagined version of a good Red Sonja movie? Like, and I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating here, but like, no, it's like, and yeah, I'm able to like list some good feminine characters, some great women characters. I think Ellen Ripley is a great character. I think she's fantastic. I think, Elizabeth of England has been portrayed amazingly in a lot of material that makes her excellent. I think every character Judi Dench has ever played has been fascinating. I think she was great as M, and I think that that's really cool. Um, there's plenty of characters that I like. I think that Wonder Woman as a superhero is a fascinating character that I really like. I think that Batwoman, Batgirl was a really interesting character that is interesting more than her. Catwoman is a really cool superhero character. But there's but it always seems like there's such a struggle to like, I feel like women are just kind of, for not recently, but in the past, women had always been kind of chasing after things. Like, I feel like we're kind of reaching a point where now you can actually have feminine characters, women that are different and not just trying to ape something a man did before her. Like, I don't think, like, I don't like the Hunger Games movies. I think they're kind of bland and mediocre acting, but I think at least Katniss Everdeen isn't really derivative of anybody. But then I look back to like movies that came out when I was younger. Like I look back at like fucking Cutthroat Island, where Gina Davis is just doing an Errol Flynn type role, and it's like trying to ape pirate movies, Blackbeard's Ghost and whatnot, and it's like, I feel like people growing up now, I'm happy for them because I feel like there's a lot more strong women characters a lot now. Um, and I think that that's a good thing. And I really wish I grew up with some better, strong women characters. I wish Lara Croft had been developed better. Because that is one character that I always felt was kind of cool, but um, I think the Angelina Jolie movie was a big old pile of shit. And I think that they didn't develop her character enough. I remember the earlier games, she was kind of an Indiana Jones James Bond hybrid in terms of personality. Um, and one of the things that I liked about that, looking back, was the way that she was kind of debonair with her sexuality. And I don't mean that she was constantly naked or she was in provocative clothing or underwear or whatever. The Lara Croft model was rendered stupidly. Theoretically, supposedly that was an accident. I don't know, but the point is like her character was written to be kind of like an Indiana Jones, James Bond type character where she was acquiring, people to, have sex with and then just being very flippant about emotions and attachment. And that sounds like a weird thing to talk about, but it's important because it established her as like a character that she wasn't beholden to men sexually. A lot of feminine characters, a lot of women are even now kind of portrayed as being possessed by their sexuality and beholden to men, and especially because of our media representation is still a lot more favorable of men who sleep with multiple women versus women who sleep with multiple men. And so the, you know, idea of portraying Lara Croft as a person who doesn't need romance, and just sleeps with whoever she feels like, but isn't concerned with spending her time that way. Like she's not portrayed as somebody who's especially promiscuous. She's just like generally flippant about romance, and I think that was important. And they really should have used that more to her character. I realized that video games at the time, I'm talking 90s, not really capable of having nuanced conversations about that in terms of graphics or what they wanted to spend their processing power on, but like I feel like that's a thing that should have been better. The idea of basically using that as a way to equate her to somebody who has command of herself. And that's a thing. And it's different when a woman does that versus when a man does it. It's different because of how society creates a standard of how women are supposed to engage in sex and relationships. So it's empowering when it's done in the right way. When it's done in the wrong way, it's just exploitative and just using sexuality as an appeal. It's got to be done in the right way, but like, you know, I definitely think it should have been done, just to give her a more complex character and to make her commanding. So, I don't know. Yeah, we need more strong feminine characters. We need more strong women. We need women who are Indiana Jones. We need women who are James Bond, not 60s Bond, but like modern Bond, a little bit better. Thank you.